prompted him to semester abroad?
Would they let you out early today? Thursday?
It sounds like you're on parole or something.
You're what?
Hybrid work.
Oh,
Nobody works
When
in
I
the
finish up
office.
all the stuff that I have to do in person, then I can go home and work. Set up
Where you can get actually some work done.
without interruptions.
Yeah.
My dog.
okay, it's 2:30, so I will call this meeting to order. We don't have any public. Is that what?
That's the audit, one of the auditors.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let's get right to it.
All right, well, the first item on the agenda is a discussion with the auditors to discuss the progress on the annual audit and the preparation of the financial statements. And looks like we've got Jared and
It's probably Paul, but
I'm not sure, yeah. Well, they're changing. Yeah, there we go. Available today. So just by way of it, here we go. Super. Yeah. So Paul and Jared are with us from Nigro. And this is our administration and finance committee made up of 2 board members and 1 community member. And what the committee has typically received is sort of an interim progress report, you know, before the formal preparation of the financial statements, reviewing any concerns, issues, things that the audit team has wanted to bring to the attention of the district's committee. And I would turn it over to Nigro to kind of maybe just present any issues they found to date, what the status is as far as completing the financial statements, et cetera.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody.
hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Just making sure. Well, thank you for having us here. This is our first year under audit. So what we're, it looks a little different. The timing wasn't the greatest this year and everything for final approval of everything and getting everything going. But our typical process each year is during the months of April, May, June, or July, when nothing is done for the June 30th audit, we conduct our administrative aspects of the audit. We entail our segregation of duties work, our look at internal controls over the transactions that have occurred over the fiscal period. And usually that happens during that period, but due to this being the timing this happened this year, everything kind of fell towards more, after the July timeline. So we're conducting it, most of that virtual this year, but spending the time asking the questions and doing everything we need to in the process. The ending process that we're working on right now is the numbers have come to rest. We're starting to deal with our auditing of those numbers and the reconciliations of those numbers on the financial statements to present to you a financial auditing statements, all put together for year end for prosperity. So that's the process that's going on right now. So we've done the administrative aspects of the audit. We've done the internal control segregation of duties aspects in there. Nothing to note really to highlight there. We're looking at, aspects of, how processes are conducted, how things work out, how numbers, come to reconciliation there at the district. And that process, we're going through that thoroughly right now. So that's kind of ended. Now the numbers have come to rest, and now we're starting to work on putting those numbers into a financial statement to present to you either the end of November or the December 2nd meeting there, as we talked about. So when we look at the overall audit process, we're not looking for the little ticky-tacky things and, oh, I forgot to sign this one little thing. We're looking for the big things because your guys are the policymakers in regards to that. We're looking at the aspects that we want to really help with is how do we make you better as an organization? With us being, seeing so many different special districts out there, we get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. How do we help that with your organization and bring best practices to you during the audit process? So we reviewed certain transaction aspects. We believe everything is falling in line. We've had some discussion with the general manager and thinking in regards to just your overall investment portfolio and different things that are going on and how things are working. You're heavily invested in LAIF as an aspect, and we see that as a kind of a discussions with our client. It's kind of a non-performing asset right now when there's other things in the market that can, your investment portfolio is your hedge against inflation is what we see. And the general manager will talk to you about a few things that we've mentioned to him that we spoke about. So if there's interest in that, there's something to go forward there. But other than that, things are looking good so far during the audit process here. Nothing really new this year. There was a new GASB 96 out, but you really don't have the type of subscription software that really works with that type of new pronouncement. We did look back at your cellular leases though. Most of those, they're long contracts. I know the prior auditor, we watched the video from last year, talked to them, oh, they're 30 years, they're this. Well, we're taking a little bit more, other stench on that and looking at it because of the fact that, Mr. Elon Musk is out there trying to produce the e-phone right now with his cars, and things may change in the next few years. So we're looking those instead of a 30-year contract with a large receivable and a large unearned revenue. We're looking those at, hey, let the 5 years run out because we're seeing a lot of cellular contracts ending. The providers are just, they're after the 5 years, they're just like, hey, we're just going to end it. So we're going to, fare more on the cautious side there. And if any of those contracts, we're only going to take them out to their 5 years. Some of them, there's only 2 or 3 years left on them. We're going to end it there and calculate that for you because we do believe that it's a turbulent industry and that some of this stuff, may become obsolete if we're going to be on, Elon Musk's e-phone with his, satellite company, and we don't need the Wi-Fi aspect anymore. So there's different things we're looking at there. So we're, instead of hanging a $2 million receivable, let's hang a couple $100,000 receivable. It's more reasonable to the reader of the financial statement than seeing something very long-term that could not play out overall. Maybe you guys, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's more prudent in regards to the age of those cellular leases, or should they be there for a whole long time? We don't look at it as being prudent to hang that out there on a very long period. So any questions about that?
I don't have any questions. I think that what you're bringing to light is, yeah, it's kind of a shift in what's occurring because of technology. So it sounds like a more conservative approach, which I would be open to doing that. So I don't know how you feel, Eric. You're the information technology guy.
Difficulty in information, like an IT side to it, especially with even cellular and things of that nature. The 10-year projection is way out there.
Well, things have changed so
30
quickly.
years is almost impossible.
Yeah.
So if you want to take a more conservative aspect to it, it says 5 years technology, we have a good line of sight to. 10 years, that line of sight wavers a little bit, but 30
It's a little
years,
fuzzy.
it's very fuzzy.
Yeah. When we looked at those, we have a client up in the Bay Area that they sit on a hill because they're on a hill where one of their towers is, where their reservoirs sit, that they have almost 15 cellular leases, and some of them are, falling off and coming on. It's crazy, but just the industry overall, we just don't see that it's, the 5 years is a good period of time. Anything further than that, like you said, technology is so ever changing every day. So
It sounds reasonable to me.
yeah,
Reasonable to me also.
yeah. So we cut those down for you. They were balance sheet items to begin with. There was no profit and loss aspect of that. You hung a big receivable and you hung a liability for the deferred revenue. They kind of matched each other, so it's kind of a wash. But we brought that down to more of a reasonable basis for you overall. Just in looking at that overall, so in the financial statement. So we're working on that, wrapping that up right now, and hope to be able to give you a really nice final report here in the coming weeks. So.
Okay. Any questions of the audit team about their work? Right now, I think we've got it tentatively slated to have the audit presentation at our December 5th board meeting. But that would mean we would probably need the draft materials a couple weeks prior to there to have a chance to go through them, make comments, make sure that there's no revisions needed, and then bring it to the board. So that's kind of our current schedule. I don't know if that's something that's that we can meet.
Yeah, we're shooting for, you know, the Thanksgiving week to have a draft over to you around there, and then get comment back to you by the end of the month so we can put it in a final draft. We always bring financials to the board meeting at a draft aspect in case there's some minor changes. I forgot to dot an I or cross a T somewhere, and then we finalize them the next day for you.
I do have a kind of a dumb question, but in the past, we've kind of went over the audit report before it went to the board. Is that what this is considered here, or what?
Yeah, I mean, so I think part of it was we're just sort of learning the way that this new audit team works. In the past, we've held this committee meeting at the close of audit field work. In other words, we do well in advance when the audit team was going to be doing the field work, and then during that, most of the work was done ahead of the field work. Field work was done over a couple of days. At the end of that field work, we held a meeting like this, and the auditors would share any preliminary results or any concerns or what to look forward to. Because the field work is all taking place remotely now. I don't know that we're further behind or ahead of where we were when the field work, when we've scheduled these meetings before, but we don't yet have have any draft numbers to kind of review. I haven't been presented any documents to begin to look at just yet.
Well, isn't it stated that they have to meet with the audit committee before? And again, is that what this meeting is?
That's what this meeting is.
But we're not doing the way we've done in the past, go over any of the details or.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any numbers worth sharing and at this point from the group. I mean, I guess we've asked them to make sure they alert you to any issues, challenges, problems, concerns, things that you might want some advanced notice on, like whether it's an internal control issue or a record keeping issue or anything of that nature that's concerning. We would want you to know about that in advance so we can begin to formulate plans to improve or adjust or modify operations to eliminate those concerns going forward. But there's been just we've had a couple of, Natalie's had more correspondence than I have, but we've had some introductory comments just discussing some unique things about Templeton and what's maybe what we do that's a little goofy here compared to maybe typical. And then we actually earlier today just discussed how we're accounting for prepaid water and sewer capacity fees and whether or not that looks correct. Because again, that's one of the areas where things are a little unique in Templeton's case. And then we have discussed investment strategies and whether a movement away from LAIF into a kind of a competing or a very similar structured investment portfolio might work. I think it could. I think it would require a change to your investment policy because LAIF is called out very specifically, and this newer competing investment, similarly managed investment portfolio is not called out or it's arguably not allowed under our policy. So that's something that I think that we want to understand better, bring forward, give you the option of including that as an option. Right now, it looks like we could improve it has same sort of benefits. So right now with LAIF, that's really our kind of that's like cash flow management, and not for check writing, but we can move money basically anytime. With 1 day's notice, we can move money. So it's not locked up like the CDs are for 5 years, or there's no risk of having to maybe liquidate something. Money's available next day. That's how this similar program would be available. It could replace LAIF or at least we can move some of the money we have in LAIF into that program and perhaps improve our investment earnings.
So am I correct? You haven't seen anything here so far that you are concerned about or question or other than what I've just heard from the general manager?
No, nothing so far that we've seen. Everything's come to you. You have a solid team there working throughout the year. That's what we do like to see is the consistency of the work being produced throughout the year. That is important overall for an organization, especially with internal controls. When there's a change in management or anything like that, or change in personnel, then it's a little bit, you want to see really what's happening, what's going on. Are they maintaining the same, status quo, or are they, slacking off on some of the duties that were supposed to be there beforehand for the person that has left. So we'd look at that appropriately. But since your personnel have been there, it's really good reporting that's coming out from the district overall. So other than that, yeah, we haven't seen anything. And our key is to wrap this up this year, get it to you in December, and then we will be out on site next year in one of those months, April, May, or June, July, to come by and.
You will actually come here?
Yep.
Okay, has anybody from your firm been here up to now?
The timing just did not work out this year. The timing just didn't work out that year. It was too tight to when everything was going on late in the summer, and we had already finished all the internal control work for all of our stuff, on-site clients. It didn't work out this year. So
If the committee's preference, because since you don't know these folks, provided we have sufficient notice about when the audit, the internal control work will take place next year, we could schedule a committee meeting to coincide with their visit. You'd have more real time, at that point they could share.
Yeah, usually at that time when we come on site, we usually ask for 1 or 2 directors to come by, sit with us for an interview, talk about things one-on-one. So it's not considered a committee meeting, but we do ask for that on site when we come by for an organization, just to talk about things, how things are going, what you see from a policy perspective as to the management day to day. So
Yeah, I think I would prefer to do that. It's called for anyway, right? The committee has to be. The audit committee.
This committee sort of functions as the audit committee. I'll also commit to you, if there's anything that comes out of the draft financials as they're prepared that looks that's surprising in any way, either to the auditors or to us staff, rather than bring that to the board directly, we can call the committee meeting back together to review ahead of the board meeting. I don't have any expectations that will be necessary, or there will be any sort of surprises. But that's also an option.
So I have a question, with regard to the scope of the audit. I know this is the first time that you're conducting the audit for Templeton CSD. So as part of your audit and getting familiar with the district, did you review our financial policies?
yes, part of that is to look at the overall policies of the districts and how they come together for your process. They're when you look at the size of the organization and the volume of the transactions that you provide there at the organization, they seem to fit your type of organization for your size. To have complete separation and segregation of every duty and everything, you would have full-time employees, doing half work there to be able to do that, where you have compensating controls work out very well for your organization.
So no surprises there in terms of the review of those policies or recommendations?
No, not for the size of your organization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, some people, well, we want to see this, draw these lines, these walls.
Yeah.
What we love about special districts, you're very entrepreneurial and the organization works very well. As entrepreneurial, you got to wear a couple different hats to get things done. And the workload for the volume of the transactions, it's sufficient there for your organization.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a little late, but welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Eric, do you have any questions? Okay.
We're ready to come up for Central California barbecue. We're ready to come up there. We're ready to come up now. We're hungry. we're sorry we missed it.
Barbecue.
Looking forward to meeting you.
You too. So I think that the furthest we've been up is in This year we went up into, Napomo, Jocko's up there, so
Very
on our,
cool.
on our tour.
Well, you hit one at 12 probably, so.
I know.
Okay, well, thank you, guys.
All right, thank you for your time, and we'll be speaking to you here in a few weeks, all right?
Okay,
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
well, Natalie, you heard what the guy says, you can't retire. He said, you gotta keep everything, I heard that loud and clear, so,
Okay,
all right.
I'm gonna work remotely.
Oh, you're gonna be like Terry.
Almost always here.
Okay, next item is the allocation of property tax and community facilities district funds.
Yeah, this was an item that you discussed at your last committee meeting, end of August. And at the time, there was consensus to, try to keep the property tax allocation the same. There was consensus to allocate the first $80,000 each year of CFD funds to cover the fire engine, the new fire engine asset replacement expense that's anticipated, should that be purchased. You expressed an interest in reviewing other additional future CFD requests as a part of the annual budget process. So I kind of took that discussion and produced these draft policy statements. I just handed out, and I apologize, I didn't get this to you in advance. Please take a moment to just read those and let me know if you have any questions or if there are any suggested edits. And then we can talk about where this goes from here.
So the only thing, under the property tax allocation, I'm kind of opposed to any change in the allocation for the fire fund. I think if there's any additional funds, that need to go to, streetlights or the drainage fund, I think it's really gotta be looked at from the property, or from the, park and recreations. And I say that because looking at the master plan for the fire department, and also from earlier this week, our Fire and Emergency Services Committee meeting, we saw where there are some large expenses that are expected to be incurred out of the fire fund. And that is, assuming that we have Representative Panetta get us the $1 million for the fire truck, but we still have another 5 million that's needed for the fire station expansion. So I'm kind of reluctant to make any changes, and maybe I would be inclined to be a little more flexible if we do in fact get that fire engine, that type 1 fire engine from Panetta's office, the funding. But at this moment, I would say that the fire fund should be the sacred cow and not touched.
So are you therefore, just looking at the top, I guess, the top section?
Top
the first
section.
The first 2 paragraphs, then, are you suggesting then that, so the first paragraph is fine, the second paragraph, when I just discussed, however, it's acknowledged that both the streetlights fund as well as drainage fund are currently operating at deficit, and therefore, within the next 5 to 20 years, small adjustments to property tax allocation are expected to increase revenues to both funds. As a result, the fire fund and or Parks and Recreation and Solid Waste Fund should expect reductions of up to 0.75% of the existing allocation when such adjustments are determined to be necessary. Are you suggesting that we would scratch, maybe we would just say as a result, the Parks and Recreation?
Correct.
Okay, and the
Correct.
fire fund then would be not at risk, I guess, if there were a
Yeah.
shift.
I mean, because I look at Park and Rec, we've stabilized over the last couple of years, especially with giving the solid waste,
The franchise fee.
the franchise fee coming back from Midstate, we've given that to Park and Rec. But, we have a lot of expenses, large expenses that we know have to be done for the fire department. So I would recommend that we just say, as a result, the Parks and Rec and Solid Waste Fund. And that's how I would state it at this point in time.
Do we specifically have to call out those different funds? Do we say as general, we expect to see certain amount reallocation in the future without calling out specific funds for it, to say is like, over the next 5 to 20 years, there's gonna be adjustments to it.
Yeah,
Not saying that
Without saying where,
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 because we don't know what would
Yeah, it
happen in
could.
5, 10
Yeah.
years, we could have dramatic differences and shifts in the funding's coming from our allocations.
yeah, I think that's fair, not to say anything at this point, other than there will be, and we'll look at them as when they occur. Or something to that effect.
well,
Well,
but
good.
you're saying you're quantifying by saying 0.75% of the existing allocation. We've gotta do that
Well,
sooner than later.
no, it's okay, well, the reason so right now, the deficits combined end up being just over 0.5% of our existing property tax in today's dollars. So a little less than 0.75, 0.75 is on the high side. And if that deficit were to have consumed both fund balances today, in order to make both those funds whole, it would take something like almost 0.75%. And so since I didn't know where that's gonna come from, it's gonna come from either fire or Parks and Rec or some combination of both. That's, it's only 100% out of 100%.
Cause there's no other.
So,
Nowhere else. So, but
so we could, I mean, so just, we could strike the whole last sentence altogether and eliminate that discussion, but I was trying to frame it that it's not a very big amount that's
I think-
under what I see today.
I think we do need to say it's 0.75% of existing allocation. I think, to Eric's point, we don't necessarily need to say today, what I'm hearing, where it's gonna come from.
Right, well, that's what
We
this
just need
says.
to have it on the dashboard that we do need 0.75% to make up that deficit.
So
That's expected.
I think that's what I attempted to write, which is as a result, the fire fund and or the Parks and Recreation and Solid Waste Fund should expect reductions.
But we can't, but
It's
I
it
don't,
has to come from one of those two sources though.
it's one or two sources, but but we're not saying that that has to be done now.
No, it does not need.
So
to
I
be.
think we just need to say that we do need to make that adjustment by that percentage, but not necessarily say where.
Well,
'Cause,
it's
it's
obvious
just.
where.
I mean,
Well, it is obvious, so it doesn't have to be stated. It doesn't have to be stated. And the reason why I say that is because you know as well as I do, if once we say fire or Parks and Recs, it then gets into a discussion about, who wants to protect what. So if we just avoid that discussion and focus on what's the amount that we need to kind of reallocate.
well, you don't.
Because you're not running to have us make that decision at this point in time.
No,
So that's why I'm saying is it's better not to say anything. Just focus on it's 0.75%.
But it's not, he's estimating that, and he said, right now, it's below 0.5%.
But we're
He's
still not,
guessing
but we're still not,
liberally.
I know, it could be 2%, but
well,
my point is
it
that.
probably won't, it probably will not, it's not it's the amount that likely needs to be shifted away from one of the current recipients of the property taxes is small, under 1%. I'm confident in that. Our deficits they're small. Now, I don't think you don't need to decide today who takes the haircut. You don't to accommodate this. And we don't even, in the case of the drainage fund, it's not a certainty that we'll need to make this shift. In the case of streetlights, it's a near certainty that you'll need to, because streetlights is already a beneficiary of property taxes. It is
Inclusive. of that, Yeah,
it's how we fund it.
so,
So, it's a near certainty, the streetlight fund is, but the deficit in the streetlight fund is like $3,000 a year. I mean, it's like 1/5%.
so really, when this decision needs to be made is when we go into the next budget cycle. In terms of.
So it
where
could be
comes
5 or
from.
10 years from now.
Okay,
Yeah, we have,
But-
there's a fund balance in the streetlight fund that we're
okay,
slow, that we can burn down before you actually have to make.
but we don't need to decide where
You
it
don't,
comes
that's
from
right.
at this point.
That's right.
So that's why I'm saying, because it will become an issue with some other folks in terms of, can't touch Park and Rec. Or then it gets in and the focus is lost over what do we need to fix the deficit as opposed to where it's coming from. I would rather wait to have that discussion about where it comes from.
Yeah, I
What
don't
we
think
need
you
to
need,
make-
I don't think you need to have that discussion today.
Okay,
But I don't think the intent of the policy wasn't to. It doesn't actually say it. I mean, my reading of it says, and of course, I mean, I wrote it, so I guess my reading of it may not be as objective. But my reading of it is just to call out that the goal here is to preserve the historic allocation. However, we recognize that some small amount of that allocation is gonna have to change in time for these two reasons.
so maybe we say as a result, those departments funded by property tax.
Should
Should
expect.
expect, yeah.
They could expect to have a reallocation. Let's see,
And just don't call out the names.
rather than calling out the
That
departments,
causes,
it's just the departments that are funded by property taxes. Should expect reductions of up to 0.7. Well, but it's not those departments. They
I
should
would just say
expect
what
a
Jeff said
reallocation of
originally.
existing property tax allocation. That's all we're saying, is that expect that, yes, today it's been here and it's historically been here, but we're running deficits in the future, which may prompt us to reallocate.
I think what he said originally was fine.
I don't want
It
to,
didn't
no, I disagree. You haven't seen some emails. Uh, You haven't seen some emails. I think when we get into saying park, the fire and or park and recreations and solid waste, it
No,
starts,
I disagree with that too, but that's not what he just said
what did he just say? Then state it,
before you
State it.
talking.
state
I
it.
don't know, that's why I said I
Well, how
like
do you
it.
know, how do you know what he said if you can't
Because he-
restate
he
it?
said- he did not use allocated from,
So I don't
Say
know
again,
what
you said
well,
again.
I don't know what I said, but I was trying to what Debbie was speaking of, if I was gonna revise it to eliminate those, I would say I would make that last sentence read, as a result, comma, funds currently receiving or I can't read my writing.
Property tax.
Property taxes should expect reductions of up to 0.75.
I like
Correct.
that.
Yeah,
I like
because then it doesn't get into departments. It's really just speaking to, we may make a shift in the future.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is one, I can't hide the fact that the shift is gonna have to come from Parks and Recreation and Fire. Those are where
Yeah.
that's just, that's a black and white issue. It's just, there's no denying that that's where it's gonna have to come from. I agree, you do not need to make that decision today. And I think the important thing here is just to highlight that the expected adjustment down the road is still a very modest one. It's still, we're talking about right now about $8,000 a year between the two funds, drainage and streetlights. It's pretty modest. It's not necessarily revolutionary. So, I can revise that last sentence to not highlight the word fire or parks and recreation,
right.
and I think that
I
would
agree.
maybe take
Yeah.
away the.
Yeah, I think it's just saying
argument.
those funds that receive property tax revenue.
Just keep in mind, the streetlight fund is one of the funds operating at deficit, so it's not a source for taking. Unless we were to eliminate some services like the Main Street streetlights, as an example, it's not one that's you could borrow from it, just make the problem worse.
And the drainage fund, I know that it's specific homeowners. And the issue is that we would have to do a Prop 218. And those homeowners would likely not approve any rate increase. So I know there was some legislation in the past that we were hoping would be passed that would prevent us from having to go through that 218 process.
Well,
Do you have any
yeah,
update?
I don't
on
have an
that?
update for you, but let me try to clarify.
Okay.
The 218 process, the proposition 218 is a pretty broad proposition. We tend to think of it when we talk about refuse rate adjustments and water rate adjustments. Well, under utility adjustments, the Prop 218 requirements is a notice and a protest requirement. Essentially, we have to notice all the property owners and ratepayers of their opportunity to protest. And then, provided there's not a 50% protest amongst property owners, the board gets to decide whether those rates are adjusted or not, based on the information that you have available to you at the time. Under non-utility services and charges subject to Prop 218, it's just the opposite. Instead of a protest, the majority has to approve. The majority of those ballots that come back have to be in favor of the rate adjustment. And the historic interpretation of storm drainage falls in this latter category, which made it virtually impossible to raise rates. In other words, it didn't require, it wasn't protest based, it was approval by the voters essentially of all the votes cast, X number, more in favor than opposed. I mean, so think about like forming a new water district or something like that. That's the dilemma. There were changes legislatively to alter the interpretation of the Constitution to say storm drainage should be treated like a utility, like water and sewer. That really hasn't been sorted out yet in the court system.
Okay.
Templeton's got this little tiny operation.
Yeah,
We're not going to go to court over this.
no.
So we want to make sure before we walk down that path that it's a proven and a proven technique or a proven, we don't, it's just not what things, again, we're
It won't
not,
be challenged in court.
we can't, we're not gonna, it's, yeah, we would rather see somebody else be challenged and see how it shakes out. To my knowledge, that's not yet occurred, but lots of cities and other agencies are following this interpretation because we're not alone in the dilemma that it has caused in terms of this storm drain fee. So you're right. Right now, we have 2 storm drain areas where a limited number of Templeton properties pay a very tiny monthly fee to fund those. And that therein lies sort of the issue.
And
So-
it hasn't been touched. And there's no inflationary or
Right.
a CPI or CCI adjustment for that either. Yeah, so it just stays flat.
So there lies the issue, there lies the challenge. It doesn't necessarily, I'm not convinced, that's why I said we may need to adjust. The property tax property taxes, you have absolute authority on how to spend almost without restriction. So it's a guaranteed way of funding that deficit. This raising the rates through Prop 218 notice on a protest basis is not guaranteed because we don't want to, it could be challenged. And so I would, before we march down that path, I'd want to make sure it was a near bulletproof solution. And, as we get close, we've got several more years before this, about 5 years really of money in that fund at our current pace before we have to deal with it. And I say have to deal with it. So at some point in the next several years, if it becomes clear in court cases or otherwise that you can use the protest method under Prop 218 to raise those rates, then there would be a mechanism to go with, and that might eliminate the need to shift some property taxes. But again, in the whole big picture, we're talking about
It's small,
yeah,
It's small.
six.
but it's still, I look at it, it's kind of the thorn in our side too. And there's a number of constraints. But with that, we don't have with that, well, that's kind of embedded in the property tax. It's not billed separately to those homeowners, correct?
No, we bill monthly through our utility bill.
For the drainage, and we have no CPI or CCI adjustment. Is that something we could introduce to at least keep
If we
it from
comply,
falling?
if we comply with Prop 218. Same issue altogether, whether it's protest or majority vote.
Once we're waiting on this larger agency to go through the courts.
And be challenged and get some
Once it
yeah.
succeeds, then for.
case history. But my thing is that we're continuing to fall behind if we're not doing any CPI or
You
CCI.
can't without
Okay, I know.
compliance.
That's why I'm saying it's one thing to have the rate, because the rate is falling behind. And it continues to fall even further behind with the cost continuing to go up. At some point, these folks are gonna get an adjustment and they're gonna be surprised.
Yeah, if there's a mechanism to do so. Yeah, there is a mechanism to do so. It's just
It's just,
the
it's not.
safest
it's not
way of
gonna
doing
succeed.
so
It's-
would be doing so through the non-protest provisions of Prop 218, asking these residents to vote in
Approve it,
favor.
Yeah, and they're not.
But most people don't wanna pay more for the same thing. Although maybe they would, I suppose in 4 years, if we don't know anymore and we could give that a try. I mean, the worst thing that
I
could
think
happen
if
is we
anything,
fail.
if nothing else, if and when that time comes that we look for increasing the rates, we need to look at a
Sure.
CCI,
Yeah, it can't just be
index.
flat.
Yeah, so it kind of keeps pace with inflation.
Okay, so on the first one, I'll eliminate, if it's the concurrence of the committee, just to eliminate the references to the specific funds, just list funds. And then on the second separate issue, really, on the CFD, please read these 3 paragraphs and tell me, do we think this captures what you discussed at your last meeting? And
Can we say in the second sentence in the first paragraph, say, the stated purpose of the additional tax levied under the CFDs may pay for public services provided by the district to the annexed parcels, including but not limited to maintenance of fire, emergency, blah, blah, blah. I would rather say, because to say are, to me,
well,
when that's counter to what the intent was. when
this language comes straight out of the adoption paperwork. So
Oh,
the
it
word-
does?
Once
Okay.
once the word to pay for,
Okay.
this is is right out of the adoption. So everything after the word are in that sentence is how it reads.
Well, I'm not saying take out all those areas. I'm just saying it's the stated purpose was for fire and emergency services. But it may cover some of these other services as well.
What's in the paragraph is the adopted.
Adoption, okay, never mind. So when it says it's for the second paragraph, the last sentence, it is recognized that there are additional costs to provide such expanded services. The CFD funds are restricted in terms of it is for expanded services and not to cover operational expenses, correct?
No, it can cover operational expenses, but not for services that were provided prior to the formation of the CFD. So like, I would argue that it would be difficult to use CFD funds to pay for mowing of the grass at Evers and German Park, because those park facilities existed in largely the same way they are today prior to the formation of the CFD.
Okay.
If we added a park, then absolutely you can use CFD funds to pay for the maintenance of that new facility. Does that make
Yep,
sense?
yep, yeah. But it's where the services have been expanded, and I say operational cost because I'm looking at today's expenses. I'm good.
The last sentence on the last paragraph, where you say all future and funding request. Who's gonna request?
If the departments would, or a board member might wanna ask for, I mean,
Why can't we just say all future uses? Instead of
yeah,
request
you're right, all future,
uses?
Well, all future requests,
Yeah, but that means somebody's gotta request.
Yeah, they
it,
will.
And I don't.
it should be, because it's gotta come before the board. It should
Right,
come out of
so all
committee.
future uses, so it's gonna come to the board under any circumstance.
But it's a request then.
But if nobody requested it, I mean, you're saying it. We're not gonna look at it unless some department requests it.
I'm saying a committee. It could be the finance committee, it could be the fire, it could be park and rec.
But it comes to the fire committee after.
And
to
they have to
decide.
then take it and approve it to go before the board. Because those committees can't approve it.
Anyway, I would not use request, so. I would just say uses.
Well, but then uses makes it sound like there's no approval process, and there is. It's a request.
Boy, that's a reach. You're saying that. You're
I'm
saying that a
saying that the
request is
committee's gotta-
uses.
I'm
have
saying
to-
that the committee has to request it and approve it to go before the board. And the board has to approve it, so it is a request. It's
But
not a
it-
use.
But it continues on here to say that it's gonna come to the administration and finance committee. So if we're gonna request it, we're gonna
No, it's
request
just
it to come
saying,
to
no,
us.
it's saying the CFD shall be considered annually as part of the budget development process, which it should. And including review by the admin and finance committee.
What do you
so it's-
think, Gary? You're the.
So it's gotta
tiebreaker.
come out of a department. It's gotta be requested.
No, it doesn't.
The request has to initiate it.
I think regardless of the actual mechanisms, with the wording of request, it puts like a kind of feel safe notion to it, whereas if you just put use, which is true, it is a use. But then it seems as if we can just allocate those funds without having public input or things of that nature, which isn't true. But request just is a safer word.
Okay.
so with regard to this last paragraph, this really sort of sort of stands at the beginning, right? This is like there was this is only useful kind of today as you consider the decisions about potentially, the board considers decisions about potentially ordering a fire engine, et cetera. Now we know how we fund asset replacement. You know, over time, that reference will become less important. We'll know that first $80,000 goes to fire to cover the asset replacement. And then, you know, only dollars in excess of $80,000 are really available at any given time. Right now, we're collecting about $75,000 a year. So there really isn't any available ongoing revenue in the CFD this year. Now, come next July, we'll know how much that grows and how much is available. I did wanna, for a couple reasons, I wanted to have this in here. One, it creates a defensible argument about why you used your first 80 grand. It's something new. It's because we've got a growing community. We've identified the need to have the second Type 1 engine, and now we've documented that. And then two, once this committee or the board makes a determination to allocate additional ongoing CFD funds for a new obligation, then it won't end up in this policy potentially, but it would be codified or documented in the budget or perhaps some other mechanism, some other location.
No, I think this is important to basically kind of provide some history and also the intent, but also what was eventually, or ultimately what was approved for CFD funds and how they could be used. And how they so far have been allocated.
Which they haven't, right?
Well, but it's going before the board to make that recommendation. or
Yeah,
to-
yeah, and even then though, this won't, just keep in mind, so just mechanically, I guess that's a lousy term for what I'm discussing is.
The process.
If we're going to, if we're gonna allocate the first $80,000 annually, because it's not $80,000, it's $80,000 every year going forward, pretty much. that money really won't be needed. It's not being allocated in this year's budget because the
Yeah.
first payment on, or first contribution as replacement might be 3 years from now. So one interesting note, even though I said there's probably, right now, I couldn't, there isn't more than $80,000 coming in. But by the time we're ready to make that first $80,000 contribution from the CFD fund to the fire fund, let's say that's 3 fiscal years from now, we will have saved up some $300,000. So the CFD funds it'll have a chunk of money, right? 3 more years at 75,000 plus what we have in the bank now. So something like $300,000. There would be more money, but just one-time money, not annual money.
Yeah.
Available. So yeah, I don't want you to think that now that you've allocated this $80,000, or the board, assuming the board stays with the strategy and the engine gets ordered, that there's nothing left. There'll be a pot of money. That just right now won't be
It's gonna continue to build up.
until we begin using it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then is there consensus, there's no need to change anything on this one here? I understand I'll think further about the word request. I guess I was thinking that
I'm fine.
we've got basically is departments looking for money to enhance services. That's what comes before, that's what's in the budget, right? It's their requests. It's when you review the draft budget, you're reviewing essentially the requests of funding to provide certain services and.
I just don't, but I agree with Wayne. I don't think you need to say all further and, it's just all future requests.
Yeah,
And I agree with that.
Only because you said it, you recommended it.
No, I'm talking about the request.
Oh, the request.
so, okay, 2 youngsters out there. Well then, my recommendation is, I don't, do you think these policy statements belong in our like, financial,
Yes,
Yeah.
strategies?
Yes.
Financial,
because I think it says, it's basically stating, kind of, in the way of a policy, kind of the history behind our property tax allocation. Instead of somebody coming in and saying, well, how'd you come up with the allocation? Well, we can say, this is the way it's been done for this many years. And if we're open to making those changes, but it's, I think you need to embellish it to say what's gonna take to make those changes, because it still also has to come before the board. But I think it's kind of sets in stone some history and something to reference. If you should leave, if Natalie should leave, if the
No.
board changes, at least
Yeah,
there's something to fall back on, because property tax allocation and CFD are they're really the only funds for a number of our departments. And so we need to have this kind of as, I don't know, something to reference for future folks that come before this committee or that become part of the board or this committee, or in your case, as a general manager, there's something to reference. So I think it makes sense to make it part of the policy, financial policies.
then we'll do is I'll keep I'll not revise the content here, but maybe the headers to match our
The formatting.
yeah, the formatting and really reference maybe like budget development or I'll try to find.
Embellish it a bit.
Yeah, to go in and then we'll bring that forward to the board. As an amendment to the financial policies, just these 2 sections. And that would be that would take a resolution to approve. If you recall, this kind of got triggered when the board adopted the budget this year. It had a revised cost allocation plan that you're very aware of. And when that budget was approved, it was approved with the recommendation that this committee look at particularly the property tax allocation and report back to the board with a recommendation before the end of the year. So we would bring this back before the board as this is your recommendation, but essentially not to touch the property tax allocation to the extent possible. And that would then come before the board.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay. Future items. Any member would like to ask for an item to be put on the agenda in the future? More items?
More items?
4 items.
Oh. I'm just thinking, do we need to discuss how this audit process went, with the auditors?
Probably be a good idea
Kind of a little debrief,
after they issued it.
yeah.
I don't know how much there is to, well, so far to talk.
Have
about,
you,
but
you're happy with the way things have gone, or I don't know if happy is the right word, but satisfied,
Just different.
different?
So I think it would be, I mean, cause we went through the process of saying, well, we needed to find new auditors and we did do an RFP and looked at several different vendors. So I think it might be worthwhile in doing some kind of debrief, after the audit report is delivered. Cause I think it would be beneficial for this committee to get some feedback, and see, how it went, how satisfied are we?
Yeah,
It
I think,
also kind of seems like I haven't gotten the whole audit process either, that with the next year, with them
Next year
coming
would
in,
be,
you know, there might be more to talk about, but
yeah, I think that if, I think we just don't have a lot of, we don't know these folks. And since everything was done remotely and there really wasn't a lot of interaction, at least not yet, they requested a lot of documents, which we provided, Natalie provided. And we're just assuming they've been satisfied with everything they're looking at, because they're not asking a lot of questions. They've asked a few. I think that we would have a better feel for this going forward after they come here and really do the in-person field work. And it makes sense at that time to have if they want to meet with you individually, that's fine, but I really would recommend that you have a committee meeting when they're here.
Okay.
It's just a different, I think it's different, once you know somebody, after you've looked at them in the face and said, you sure you haven't seen anything that's messed up, right, cause they really haven't, I don't know how they would have seen, all of our internal control
When did
issues.
we approve, this, what is it, Nigel and Nigel?
Nigro.
Yeah, when did we approve it? I mean.
It was this summer.
Yeah, but so was it kind
Oh.
of didn't allow for time for,
Well, I wouldn't say that. It doesn't, it's just their program. We didn't realize this until we started the
that
kickoff
they do
process.
it remotely?
Well, no, I knew we knew they did a lot remotely.
they
But
did stuff
they
at a
wouldn't-
different time of year.
Yeah, that they
Yeah,
wouldn't
different
do
approach.
the internal control work separate completely from the preparation of financial statements. So what they have said, and they said this to us before too, is that they do their stuff in the spring and they'll be scheduling that. Well, I mean, we need to be here for that. We can't wait until, I can't wait till May 10th and then tell us they're gonna be on May 20th. What if we're not here? What if Natalie's scheduled off? What if?
I've got a cruise in May.
Yeah.
Well, so
no,
that's
you gotta be here.
like what I'd like us to talk about.
So
is
it's just-
kind of what was the schedule? Was it because it was the first year and, it was new and maybe there was a timing issue with, when we selected them that prevented it from being, as smoothly as what we would like. So I think it'd be
Yeah, I
worthwhile
think that's
having
all,
that
that's
discussion.
all fair statements. I would say that under our prior audit schedule, we were not late. All the field, the stuff could have been provided to
It
the
was-
auditor remotely. They could have done the
It
field
was
work.
I mean.
Well, this
Leaf and
seems like
Cole,
it's
it was-
really late in being done.
Well, Leaf and Cole, it was way different. I worked with one auditor, and as things were done, they were forwarded, things were addressed. And by the time they got here, everything was done and they were doing the work, the writing of the report. This was different in that, the books are closed, everything's uploaded to them. September 15th, I had 2 dates, September 15th and September 30th to have everything uploaded to them. I had a few questions. Other than that, I haven't had much feedback. So other than our phone call today, I reached out to him yesterday asking, is there any concerns? We had a phone call with them this afternoon and.
Well, and I think it would be good to kind of set some expectations for next year in terms of what kind of contact would you like to have? You know, should there just be checkpoints along the way? Because I look at it and say, well, it's really kind of 5 months after the end of the fiscal year.
Well, I don't think you should look at this as late. I think we've historically done our
We've
stuff.
had it done earlier.
We've had it done early, a little earlier, but that's always been weird. Most most government
Aren't
entities
done
do
this
not have
early.
this until the end of the year, the end of the calendar year or into the following year. It's 6 months to a year later before the audit.
That just seems excessive. It just seems like an awful long time.
So last year. When did we have, although they met with you at the end of September,
It wasn't until November.
it wasn't done until November.
Yeah, we're not really behind and, well, we'll see. We might be a few weeks later than we've been over the last couple of years. I think it's been done as early as October and as late as
And that's pushing
November.
it, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be a little like a month later, but this is still pretty quick. What ended up happening with Leaf and Cole is they did some of their stuff right after the close of the book, right after the close of the fiscal year. And they kind of took us and tried to get us out of the way before they did their other clients. So,
They did one client at a time.
well,
No.
maybe Neil, I don't know.
I don't think so, but
Well, it would be interesting to
Yeah.
know kind of, to kind of look at what the process has been since they're new, we're new to them. And, can some things be done better? What worked, what didn't work? And, because our prior auditors, it was probably a lot easier for you. But I mean, it sounds like you've had no contact with them, so I'm hoping there's no surprises, no aha with the audit report once they provide it.
I guess the only thing I will say is previously I felt like it was more in-depth than what I just went through.
Yeah,
But they don't know as,
So that's what I'm saying is I think it'd be worthwhile to have the discussion.
yeah, we can just calendar,
Yeah,
once the audit's complete at your next meeting, we'll just put a little debrief on there. And again, I would recommend that we do something more participatory with them when they actually do come. Because I'm not convinced, I'm not concerned, but I'm not convinced that they truly audited our internal controls. Because I don't know how, other than reading about them, I don't know how they would know what we do.
Yeah, that's
so I did
my,
have one phone call with one of the gentlemen. And we talked for about 45 minutes on the processes of how we do different things.
Yeah.
But other than
but
that,
that's what you told them.
right, other than that, they had told us earlier that they were gonna talk with everybody in the department of their roles, but.
See, that's always been my concern. I realize I'm an old fogey and I always believed in you gotta meet with people face to face. You can't do this nonsense.
I've
But
been
But,
3 years without face
well,
to
but
face.
you're a youngster. Anyway, you can find out, in my mind, you can find out more about going around talking to people than you can by spending 12 days on the screen talking to people. And so my concern is the fact that they have not been here. They have not done anything, and so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and we'll see how it works. How it works next year.
I would recommend if you feel that way, that when the audit report comes before the board, that you make a comment to them that, you really expect a thorough review of, when you're here next year, please give us a critical examination. You're not really, we're paying them to do two things: compile our reports and put it in a format that meets the standard, one, and two, audit it. A critical, objective, third-party review. You wanna make sure that part's happening.
I mean, I always remember 40 years ago, I went to an audit conference and they were talking about everything was perfect with this company on a certain building. Everything, all the i's were dotted and the t's were crossed. And the auditor happened to say, well, I wanna see the building. Well, long story short, there was no building.
Trust me, I've dealt with
pharmacy claims, I worked with the FBI on fraudulent pharmacy claims. I've had people embezzle money because there wasn't sufficient segregation of duties, so I.
Well,
I've
but
seen
he
it.
did say at one point that I've always said, I mean, you can make this place airtight, but you need about 20 more people so that, you know, so that you.
They've
you
been
can do
reasonable,
all
I think
of
they've
it.
been reasonable,
There's-
Well,
there's
they understand our
some
form of
things that
government, they've been reasonable.
Yeah.
I think he.
Anyway,
Okay, so what else besides the debrief? Is there anything,
nope, I guess not, so. All right, thank you, guys, appreciate it, thank you, Natalie,
thank you.
Thank you.
and Jeff.
Thank
And
you,
Carrie.
Thank you. Carrie?
thank all of you for spending your afternoon with us.
Oh,
It's
fine.
always good.
It's a nice day.